Good evening, everybody. My name is Pascal Lamy. I'm the Vice Chair of the Paris Peace Forum, and I'll have the privilege to moderate this panel, which is devoted to North-South relations. In the Paris Peace Forum, 2 years ago, in 2022, we had a first discussion with the French president about these issues. There was a bunch of solid representatives of the South, and we had a quite substantial discussion that led a year later to this Paris Pact on Planet and People, which is one of the possible, if not remedies, at least start of a solution on the financial side of this major, crucial North-South relation. Since then, most of what appeared in the debate at the time of contentious issues between North and South have all gone worse. Poverty is again on the rise. Economic and financial conditions are tightening. Most countries are now overburdened with debt. Military open conflicts are expanding in Ukraine, in the Middle East. Trade protectionism is on the rise, mostly, but not only, on the US side. And last but not least, on the climate question, we now know we are overshooting the 1.5 degree threshold, and we all recognize that this catastrophic situation is improving too slowly not to remain potentially catastrophic. So that's the starting point I will put on the table of our discussion tonight. I have 4 questions in mind which I have shared with the panelists, but which are not in any specific sequence. The first one is, do you agree on this somber starting point? The second, what would be your recommendation to improve what I see as a very worrying level of North-South tensions? These are not the only ones in the system, but they are growing, and together with others, they contribute to this feeling we have that the international order is somehow crumbling. Third question, what should be the French and more generally the European attitude? How could my country, the country of Jean-Noël Barrot, help moving things in the right direction, it being understood that the real leverage in terms of size of influence is at the level of the European Union? And fourth, a bit about this Paris Pact for People and Planet, is it the way to go or not? So I will first ask the people coming from the South. I hesitate to say representatives of the South, but people coming from the South to speak their mind on these questions, roughly 5 to 7 minutes each, starting with Rebecca Greenspan, the UNCTAD Secretary General and former Vice President of Costa Rica, Then Yuba Sokona from Mali. He's the chair of the African Institute for Sustainable Energy and System Analysis and a former vice chair of the IPCC. Then Isabella Teixeira, former environment minister of Brazil, who is now the chair of the International Resource Panel. And then Comfort Hero, who's the president and chief executive of the International Crisis Group, and who is both Nigerian and British. So they will first speak their mind as clearly and as frankly as possible, and then I will ask the President of the Republic of Slovenia, Natasia Pirc-Musar, to give us her view as a European, and then to Jean-Noël Barrot, who is the Foreign Minister of France, to also speak his mind on this topic. So that's the trajectory we will follow. Let me start in asking Rebecca for her views on the size of the problem, the state of the problem, and what solutions she would see if she had to decide. Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Pascal, and it's an honor to be with this wonderful panel. So let me first refer to some of the things that you said. I think that it's true that multilateralism and the relationship North-South has been under stress. First, because of the cascading crisis, what we have called the cascading crisis. So we have climate change affecting vulnerable countries the most. We have the COVID pandemic. We forget about the COVID pandemic, but we haven't gotten back to the sustainable growth path after the pandemic, and especially developing countries have not. We have war, and war is disrupting, and not only is the pain of people, but it's also disrupting trade and disrupting the global economy. And we had the cost of living crisis that we also forget, because now that inflation is going down, we think that prices are not high, but prices continues to be very high, 20% higher than they were before the inflation started. So we have a general discontent because households are under stress. And in a way, we say that the global economy maybe is having a soft landing, but we are landing in the wrong runaway. This is a runaway of a new normal of low growth, and very low for developing countries to really combat poverty and inequality, and on the other hand, to have the resources to invest in the climate transition. And we have high debt. 3.3 billion people live in countries that are spending more in servicing the debt than on education or health. Yes? And we have the two variables that could help developing countries overcome these challenges, that is trade and investment. We have very weak investment. Investment never recovered after the financial crisis. And with respect to foreign direct investment going to developing countries, we know that foreign direct investment is going especially to the big countries. The small and medium-sized countries are not receiving any. One indicator I want to give you is that if you see the numbers, how much of the investment in renewable energy is going to Africa from total investment going to renewable energy? 2%. 2%. So we are, as I said, low growth, high debt, weak investment, and a fragmented or maybe going to a fragmented trade system. And the developing countries need trade and investment to make it happen. And so that's why, you know, in a way, we have this, worry in the developing countries because they see that the economy is not giving them the space to be able to surmount the challenges that they are facing. Two more things. I think that there are opportunities, and the opportunities lie also in the digital transformation and in the energy transformation, because the critical minerals that we need for both, for digital and for renewable energy, the reserves are in the developing countries. So we have a huge opportunity to turbocharge growth and development for the future. The thing is that for that to happen, we will need to diversify the economies of these countries. If we will go back to a commodity wealth system that will make these countries only commodity dependent, we know what that means. Because we have that now. Commodity dependent countries are there are more countries that are commodity dependent today than they were in the past. So if we don't add value, they won't be able to take advantage of these opportunities. And there is where we need investment, we need technology, and we need a trade system that will allow them to thrive. And this is possible because some of the policies and things that have to happen to make that viable were here discussed in the People and Planet Summit here in Paris and are in the Pact of the Future. We need a system for restructuring debt. We need multilateral development banks to scale up their investment in the developing world and crowd in private investment. Let me say again, private investment is not going to these countries because they perceive the risk to be too high. So we need the multilateral development system, we need the multilateral banks to really lower the risk and have more long-term money and resources going to the developing world.
Okay, good.
Okay?
So,
that's okay?
We know Rebecca, you agree with the diagnosis, and your solution is trade, investment, technology, finance, multilateralism. That would be a proper summary? Good. So, Yuba, vous avez accepté, parce que c'est commode pour tout le monde, de parler anglais.
You agreed to speak English because it's easier for everybody, or I asked the group, and the group decided that it would be better to speak English. And you kindly agreed to speak English.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate to this dialogue. And it's complex and complicated at the same time, very simple. But if I just look at the title, Closing the Gap, I don't think it's a matter of gap and closing it. Hardly I can see the African, the LDC, how they can close any gap. I think that is a matter of the wrong agenda, putting the country of the South in the wrong agenda. Because the climate agenda has been set by the South, by the North. And we have been embarked in an agenda that has not been set by us. This is fundamental. And then how you reverse that is to bring the South setting its own agenda, and this agenda is development, or making a better living condition for the people. This is the first agenda of the South. And then how you achieve that. By achieving that, And you need to be in a much more sustainable path, in a climate-compatible manner. This is how we should address the issue. As far as we remain on the agenda set by the North, we're not making any progress. I think this is one fundamental element. And I can give a number of illustrations on that. Actually, in Africa, there is 60 billion investment for hydrogen. And we know that there is less than 50% of the African countries who have access to electricity. And 90% of the hydrogen is export, with very limited local added value, because we are saying that the green investment, but it's not for the continent, it's outside the continent. Second element, I think we need completely different approach of development. And we need to revisit development agenda, because the current development agenda is not conducive to anything specific, because it's not at all considering the country's specificity. And then we need to invest on institutions than on human resources on project. I travel all the time all over Africa. Hardly you will find a parts of Africa, any institution in an African country that can adequately deal with climate, energy, and development issue. And then this, we spend 30 years not creating. This is why we have created the African Scholars and African Institute for Sustainable Energy and System Analysis, a virtual institute, because of to maintain and to put our own agenda. Even on the science part, it was a wrong agenda. I have been in IPCC for 30 years. It's only during the fourth assessment report that development emerged in the IPCC assessment. It was about economics and climate science. It's only after the fifth assessment report, what we bring in the short-term issues, that development aspect, it was related to long-term perspective, 2100. This is related to the lifetime of the infrastructure in the North. And then the other element is the narrative. We need to have the seven narrative. One of the main narrative actually is energy transition. I do not know what kind of transition we can have in the African context on energy aspect, because we need to build the infrastructure. It is not in place. In Europe, I can understand the transition, but in Africa, it's a jump starting, not a transition aspect. And we avoid to that. In Dubai, everyone applaud phasing out the use of fossil fuel, but no one indicated the use of charcoal and firewood for cooking. Africa is the only region in the world that every year there is an increase of the use of charcoal and firewood for cooking. Go to Bamako, go to Ouagadougou, go to Abidjan, go to Dakar, go to Lomé, go to Nairobi, you will find lorries and lorries of charcoal and firewood going to the capital city, destroying the environment, destroying the livelihood of the people, destroying the biodiversity, and then no one is conscious about it. It's like normal. And I think that unless we look at those different elements, and then to set the agenda for the South, and then and the Southern perspective by the South, not by the North, it's a critical element. And then to bring climate, bring development as a critical issue of climate, not a marginal aspect. And then to invest on institutions, hardly we can make any progress. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So, climate, energy transition as the #1 issue, and Africa needing its own agenda in order not to have to follow a northern imposed agenda. Now, Isabella, your own views, probably also influenced by your past in the environmental field, which looms pretty large in the discussion we've had so far.
Okay, thank you very much, Pascal. Nice to see you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you today in Paris. I just crossed the Atlantic Ocean, so I do apologize because I didn't sleep. I will do my best. My carbon footprint is so high today, Rebecca. But let's see. Okay, I think that I'd like to be back to the last century. Remember that when we have climate convention and our climate regime was a G7 initiative to address climate and energy security, and to which the developing world was invited to join. I was there, I was too young, but I was there. And the South joined it, linking climate and sustainable development and making the fight against poverty an absolute priority. So it's not a gap, okay, but different views to deal with the global problem, climate change. And also, I'd like to add biodiversity and desertification, because this is part of the global equation that we're facing today. Nowadays, 3 continents underscore the international debate on climate change. Climate change is no more a future problem. We face in the present the extreme weather events, the climate urgency, and it comes together with nature crisis, the loss of biodiversity and the scarcity, exhaustion of natural resources. These environmental changes are not isolated incidents, but part of the broader network of interconnected crises. This is very important to observe because we're discussing also environment. It's not only climate. And Paris Agreement holds this. The second, climate change is a political issue approached inside and outside on SCCC. This is happening today. Climate politics and geopolitical tensions further exacerbate the vulnerability created by climate change, creating a feedback loop that threatens the resilience of both human and natural systems, and often highlights the limits and difficulties of state-based international cooperation, Rebecca. This is multilateral system in fragmented world. Third, to ensure Paris Agreement legacy lives on, 2 political strategies could be considered to move the pieces based on solutions. And please, let's move the piece based on solutions, because I think that the power based on problems brings us today where we are. My proposal, my suggestion, based on what's happening in my country today, the G7 and G20 coalition, okay, maybe also, please, bless me, BRICS Plus on board, okay, because Brazil will chair it next year, and could be an important strategy to block setbacks and disruptive contests in Paris Agreement implementation, okay. Second, to combine the plurilateral to avoid the green protectionism, trade is very important to come, approach as also the bilateral cooperation to multilateral approach, recognizing that the multilateral systems may not be completely broken, but in a very bad shape and can only deliver incremental change when we need systemic change. The world is updating. I like to say this because it's uploading and downloading things. It's true, okay? And the concept of polycrisis underscores the idea that in our increasingly connected world, different domains such as economy, environment, climate, social systems are intertwined in ways that make crisis more difficult, more complex to manage. So the solution must be interconnected. Additionally, the lack of coherence, short-term and long-term priorities, trade-offs, and of leadership, as also the local political, social, and economic realities are also shaping up the international political ability of moving faster in cut emissions and to finance the decarbonization. As we approach the 10th anniversary of Paris Agreement, I'm so proud to be part of this process. It seems important to stay on course with implementation and to accelerate the transition to a green, zero carbon, and resilient future. The transition is not just beneficial to all societies' economies, but it is inevitable. No one country, no one society can stop it. We can try to postpone, but we cannot stop it. To come together, it's critical need to agree on climate security and less vulnerable societies. This is the point for me that you can allow countries to come together because we're exposed to climate change. So be less vulnerable probably could be a good kickoff process to come to bring people together. In the context of 1.5 Celsius and its overshooting, as you mentioned, Pascal, two tracks come together. Keep walking. This means energy secure and fossil fuels transition away. And based on experience, this must be based on demand and supply of energy, the both sides, okay, of the coin. And the second track is give up carbon, that the green ones, climate security. Given the magnitude of climate impacts in Brazil and everywhere this year, every fraction of degree matters. Finally, it seems strategic to address convergence of interests, not consensus. Okay, based on science, action, and mechanism of finance, and an innovative approach to the private sector. One that's not just about voluntary commitments, not only about planning for net zero, either companies are moving away from it, you know this.
Good.
And not to see the incentives. Investments deals on green industrialization, food and bioenergy security could be very important for Global South. And my last comment, because we are in France, and you asked me about France, it's very important to observe not only the global climate governance framework must update to embrace trade, etc., but climate democracy. Okay, how to read the world today, and the climate denialism, the green wishing, not greenwashing, the green wishing, democracy crisis, and what's happening in the Western society. Should we face climate populism? I don't know, this is between quotes. But, and the new generations. The future is in the present, and we need to manage better the political rejection of the agenda that we are facing today. So probably France and Brazil could come together concerning climate democracy, and the new generation. I hope that we can come consider the new generation, not the old ones. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabella. So, what we've heard from you is a sort of frame of an agenda for the South. Basically, you're sort of filling the question which you might open. In your view, there can be principles around which southern countries could build an agenda. Good. Comfort, we are transitioning from south to north. You're somewhere in between. So, what's your take?
I like my new redefinition as well. Thank you very much. You know, I'm born in North London, and we also have our North-South divide in London as well. And Annelies Dodds, our minister, will recognise that as well. We're very particular in the north of London about how we view the South. Look, I agree with everything that my colleagues and friends have said already. I guess I'd like to throw a challenge down to ourselves, who are in the so-called global South. But I also think we need to recognise that all is not well in the global North as well, which is making the conversation even more testy today. But let me start with ourselves, because I agree with you that we need to set the agenda, and key countries in the South need to set the agenda. And we have to be careful who the representatives are that are setting the agenda in the global South as well. So this notion of some solidarity, we have to also understand when solidarity is evoked and when it's not evoked, and who is driving the solidarity agenda, claiming to be speaking for the global South. But I'm going to limit myself to Africa, because something interesting happened about a year ago. The Africa Union, the pivotal political body that represents 54 countries, was welcomed into the family of the G20. The question that I think we, and I will put myself now in the origins of my parents, it's an important move that the African Union is in the G20. But what is the benefit of it in practical terms, and how are we going to use that platform as 54 countries is the key questions that the citizens of the 54 countries will be wanting our leaders in Addis to answer. What is the strategic agenda that we are going to walk into the room with, or what will the 54 leaders walk into the room with when they are at the G20, and how can we guarantee that the African Union itself has a very clear-eyed, sighted vision of what the agenda should be for the 54 countries. So it's a challenge I put down on the table for the African Union, because when you look at it from a number of countries on the continent, it's not clear what the strategic benefit would be for the continent. So that's a question for us in the Global South as we define the agenda. The other arena of concern, because you brought it up for Brazil, is on the BRICS as well, and especially the expanded BRICS as well. And I've been looking with great interest at the number of countries that are now entering into the BRICS as well. And what, again, is the benefit from this alliance? Is it an alliance that is seen as anti-West, or is it an alliance that is going to take those issues that are pertinent to the countries of the Global South? We talked about poverty, climate. There's a development bank tied to the BRICS. The Chinese Development Bank also tied to the BRICS as well. Are these institutions that are being created, are they going to be of service to the people of the Global South, or are they just seen as an instrument to whip the West? So I think that's another challenge that we have to ask ourselves. Now let me come to the North, because the North is not well. There's a lot wrong in a number of the key capitals that represent the North. I think we have to recognize the moment we are in. Quite frankly, it's not business as usual. We all saw also the outcome of the elections last week in the United States. And the president-elect of the United States has a particular view of multilateral cooperation. It is not one that entertains the kind of pact that you are thinking about for the future. It's a challenge, what he's proposing, or if he continues on the path. It's not a pro-friendly multilateral agenda. It's agenda that is me first, nationalistic in its instinct, very much about the domestic concern, rightly, I think, because a number of countries have serious pressure points in their countries. So you cannot ignore the fact that a number of the countries that are going to be critical in driving through a new agenda are also under severe stress. And they have to think about their domestic constituency, the domestic politics of a number of countries that are vital to shaping investment in terms of trade, in terms of climate, are under severe stress as well. So they're going to focus clearly on domestic growth, protecting their industry. You're going to see a very protectionist agenda. You've already been warned about the tariff agenda. So how do you begin to cooperate in a system where it's a very nationalistic, it's me first, it's my agenda first, it's mercantilism, it looks as though it's isolationist, it is not a multilateral cooperative agenda that you are trying to define in terms of France. That is not to say that it's not a noble cause, but I just want us to recognize the moment in which we're in. And it's not just the US also. I look around the world and I see diplomacy in decline. I see a lack of appetite. All the various institutions that are going to be critical to driving the agenda are moving in a different direction. And they're also trying to work out what they're trying to do going forward. So it's a challenging time. And I think it's a time for reflection and to ask ourselves, what are we going to be able to extract from this current multilateral disarray, where the center of gravity itself has a completely different agenda from what you're trying to pursue. I'm sorry to be a Debbie Downer, to use the American expression, but we have to also deal with the world as it is. And the world as it is, the guardrails that would often constrain behavior, the tools that you would want to use to nudge leaders into the right direction are not working. We see more wars, we see more refugee displacement, we see no defense mechanisms, we see no nothing that looks necessarily promising, despite the Pact of the Future conversation that we had in New York. I'll stop there before I go further down the tunnel. Thank you.
So let's now listen to the more northern part of the equation, which today in Paris is the European part of this equation. And as we've just heard from Comfort, it's likely that with the Trump administration, the North will not be united in many of the issues which we've been discussing. So, Madam President, what's your take?
First of all, thank you for the invitation to this really, really interesting panel with a lot of important topics that we are discussing here today. But let me start with a thinking coming from myself being a woman, being a mother, not being a president. We do live in a 21st century, and we are still facing hundreds of millions hungry children. The gap between rich and poor is bigger and bigger. 21st century. Are we in the right direction? And that's not a rhetorical question. I know you know the answer. So we are doing something wrong, terribly wrong. All the conflicts around the globe, there are 55 armed conflicts currently going on this planet, which is the highest number after the Second World War. And I will begin my thinking with the story from my country. And I want you to think about solidarity and the future of the planet, and not the future of America first or Slovenia first, as you rightfully pointed out. Slovenia became a member of the European Union 20 years ago. 20 years ago, our GDP per capita was 17,000 euros, which was the highest among ex-Yugoslavian republics and the highest among 10 new members entering the European Union in 2004. Today, our GDP is 34,000 euros, so it nearly doubled in 20 years. And what's the reason behind? Solidarity inside the European Union. 28 member states at that time, today 27, were contributing to a common budget in the European Union to develop the new members of the European Union. So we are a net receiver still. In the next 5 years to come, Slovenia is going to be a net contributor. And I often hear from my people in my country, why do we want to accept new member states in the European Union? Because we are going to get less money from the European Union funds. And you know what my answer is? Just think about Slovenia 20 years ago. If the old European Union member countries wouldn't say yes for the new member states, and they are all net contributors to the budget, not net receivers, as we are still today. So solidarity is the key. And if we go now on a global level, this is just an example, the way that I think about, solidarity in the world. Today, we have 24% of the members of the United Nations, which are least developed countries. 24% out of 193, I think 45 are least developed countries. The gross domestic product in those countries per capita is less than 1,100 euros per capita. So that's the measure, yeah? So that you become the least developed country. Those countries are mostly in Africa. And Africa is the continent which is heavily affected today of the climate change. Who's responsible for that and whose obligation is to try to solve the problems of the planet, not me first, America first, and so forth. The countries which are contributing to the climate crisis the most are the G20 countries. They produce 80% of all bad emissions, carbon dioxide emissions which are put into the air. 80%. 20% by the rest of the world, and only 4% by the least developed countries. Do we have enough solidarity? Are we investing enough into a better planet, the greener planet, sustainable planet? The answer today is no. Today, when we are here, a lot of people are in Azerbaijan, in Baku, at the COP29. Last year, I was at the COP28 in Dubai. And I came from Dubai very sad, because I saw no progress in fight against climate change. What do we have to do? First of all, sorry to say this, but we need more wise men and wise women. We need statesmen, not politicians. And please, what is guiding me through my presidency is one sentence. What's the difference between a politician and a statesman or a stateslady? Politician works the way to win the next elections. Statesman is working for the next generations. And now, ladies and gentlemen, you who are present in this room, think to yourself, can you count 5 wise men or wise ladies today of this planet, which you do trust that they are working for the next generations? There are 193 countries in United Nations. There are 206 countries in International Olympic Committee. So there are 206 presidents or kings and queens, and 206 prime ministers. That means 412 people on this planet who have the obligation for 8 billion people. Are we aware of the burden we are putting on our shoulders as presidents? Sometimes I do have a feeling that we are not aware of the responsibilities when we are reaching the position I currently have in my country. Of course, there is a difference between small and big countries. Of course, there is a difference between rich and poor countries. Slovenia's population is 2 million. We are one of the smallest European Union member countries. We are basically one of the smallest countries in the world. But we are, today and for the next year more, a non-permanent member of the Security Council inside United Nations, trying to be an honest broker with no hidden agendas, and trying to work on the agendas and topics which are important for the development of this beautiful planet, the only one that we have, ladies and gentlemen. There is no planet B. And we are fighting each other, killing civilians for what reason, what cause? I try to understand realpolitik, but sometimes I really do not understand what's going on. And if I may just conclude, Slovenia, and there are more countries, that not only Slovenia, who are thinking about finding the right solutions. One of them was just adopted in United Nations this year, and it's called Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. If we are discussing financing the future of this planet, this vulnerability index is proposing that not only GDP per capita should be taken into account when giving good credits to the countries in need, but we have to see the vulnerability and try to finance the countries in need because of the climate change catastrophes, COVID-19 catastrophes. But the World Bank and International Monetary Fund do not want to accept this. But this vulnerability index is on the table. Please check it, see, try to find the solutions. If United Nations are discussing this, do not throw the ideas across the table and just say this is not valid, it's not okay. I cannot accept this. This is why I will always, be a staunch supporter of new ideas, how to get climate justice, justified peace, and everything connected to justice. I'm a lawyer by profession, by the way. This is why I so passionately discuss law and legal obligations. And can I tell you just one more story, because it's really important for me to let it out. When we discuss climate change, I often hear, a lot of conspiracy theories that this is not happening. Even some heads of state are saying, well, climate change, that's, false, fake news. Is it really? Are we going to listen to scientists which are on a daily basis telling us that if we are going to go above 1.5 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial era, there's probably no point of return? And the story I want to share with you, I read it in New York Times just half a year ago. There was a farmer in Siberia, in Russia, who had 2,500 deer as, his stock. And one day he came there, and all 2,500 deer was dead on ground. 2,500. He didn't know what happened. And then the scientists from all over the world came there to research what the heck was going on. You know what they found out? The permafrost, which is defrosting every year for 4 to 5 meters, is now defrosting 6, 7, 8, even 9 meters below. And in that part of Siberia, 12,000-year-old anthrax woke up and killed 2,500 heads of deer. Those are the facts, scientifically proven facts. And when I said that we only have one planet, so it's our joint responsibility to think about next generations. And yes, let's be honest, bigger countries and richer countries have more responsibility than smaller ones. I hope I was not, too pessimistic, but that's the way I see it today. We need more solidarity, more awareness of responsibility, and more wise men and women in politics.
Bien. Monsieur le Ministre, on this happy note, what's your take both on the diagnosis and on what should be done?
Merci beaucoup, cher Pascal. Et avant de
Thank you, dear Pascal. Before I switch to English, I'd like to use this opportunity, this last session of the day, to thank the organizers. You're part of that team. Thank you for this brilliant edition of the Paris Peace Forum, which has become such a fixture of international life, talking about global challenges, allowing all points of view to be expressed on this stage, even though we've moved around quite a bit, and thus allowing us to enrich the debate and make sure that good ideas come to life and are implemented, because that's what President Macron wanted us to be able to really put our money where our mouth is. And I'm convinced that all of the meetings and all the good ideas that we've heard to say show that it was a good idea.
Sort of the question that Pascal asked, and I will share 3 thoughts. The first one is to try and not fall into definitions that are perhaps too broad or too diffuse for them to mean anything. I don't feel like I belong to a so-called North. I feel like I live in a very rich and privileged country that is highly developed, that belongs to a political regional organization that puts enormous weight on the rule of law and democracy, and that is called the European Union, and that bears, with respect to the rest of the world, a very important responsibility. So I'd rather define myself in a more subtle and complex definition than accepting to be sort of bundled into a so-called North, and which would mean that I have a common agenda with other parts of this so-called North, which is not really the case, because us Europeans, and I want to salute the members of the European Union and their representatives today. If we could already, to agree on a common EU agenda is already very demanding, or demanding enough, so that we don't pressure ourselves to come up with or to assume a northern agenda, so to speak. But it's not because I will reject the definition of the North that I don't think that the approach of my country and of the EU with respect to countries south of Europe does not need to change. In fact, it has started to change, and it needs to change further. We need to do things differently, and we need to do more, and we need to do better, in particular with respect to our very close neighbor, namely Africa. We need to do more for a simple reason, not only a moral reason, but because a lot of the preoccupations of our co-citizens here in Europe and in France have the key, or their key, in our relationships with Africa. Whether it's security, whether it's the fight against terrorism, whether it's immigration, whether it's food security, or whether it's purchasing power and the green transition. We can do a lot at the national level, but if we don't embrace these questions in close connection with our African neighbors, then we'll most likely fail. So that's why we need to do more with this great continent that is very close to our doors. And we need to do differently, we need to do better, because of course we have a long history with Africa, but the way we've changed our approach to Africa, and I'm speaking on behalf of France, is in putting together and implementing a transformational agenda of our relationship to Africa by establishing with each country a sort of a roadmap, a specific agenda that is going to build on our complementarities and on our mutual interests. This is a very new approach that is finding its sort of concrete applications in some of the recent sort of substantive agreements that we found, and the ambassador of Morocco is sitting with us right now, and we've basically completely refounded our relationship with Morocco by looking to the future rather than looking at the past, and defining our mutual interests in this cooperation that is going to make both of us stronger. So we need to do more, because most of our preoccupations can find a resolution by working closely with countries that are in Africa, with African countries, and we need to do better by building those solid relationships based on mutual interest. The second thought I would like to share is sort of the contrast of my first point. I think it's very important what the panelists, my co-panelists have said, namely that the countries, developing countries, need to be at the origin of the agenda, that they need their voice to be heard. But here again, I would slightly differ from what I've heard. I think that the agenda needs not be the Global South agenda. It needs to be the global agenda, period. If the so-called North and the so-called South do not agree on the agenda, then we're going nowhere, because we are interconnected. We live on the same planet, and as the President just said, there is no planet B. And so the responsibility of leaders around the globe, whether they're in the South or in the North, is to make sure that, well, the great challenges facing humanity, mankind, poverty and climate change, are the top priority of the global agenda wherever you may stand on the planet. Which leads me to the third thought I would like to share with you. We're 80 years after the Bretton Woods Agreement, and next year we'll celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. And I think the questions that is underlying in a number of the discussions that happen today is the following. Can we effectively fight climate change and poverty that are affecting developing countries much more than developed countries with the UN architecture, with the architecture that was built on the ruins of the Second World War? And my answer to this question is yes, because there is no alternative. There is no alternative to the UN Charter. There is no alternative to justice. But there is a but. Those institutions, those principles will only allow us to address those big challenges that are ahead of us and that are common to the entire planet if we reform them in order for them to be legitimate enough and strong enough to address those challenges. And France and the President Macron is fully committed to reform those institutions in three directions. One is solidarity, the other one is governance, and the third one is enforcement. And I will be brief, but I want to highlight those three sort of important directions in which we want to take the international community forward. The first is solidarity. We need to overcome the climate change challenge together. The South has polluted much less than the so-called North, is going to be affected more by climate change than the North, so there needs to be solidarity. This is the exact intuition that led to the Paris Pact for the people and the planet, that aims at making the transition sustainable and bearable for countries that are most affected, despite of the fact that they've not contributed as much to global warming than some of the richer countries. And this pact has now been endorsed by more than 60 countries, and a year and a half after the first summit is already delivering results, and we will push this agenda further with the reform of the financial institutions, with the increase in the flows from the north to the south, because we cannot ask countries to choose between fighting against poverty and fighting against climate change. And you know why? Because people will always favor, this is my intuition, or this is my thinking, people will always choose to fight against poverty, to fight against injustice, while we need to get them to fight against climate change at the same time. And so this is also a call to everyone here to join forces and help us promote this 4P project, which is very important. Second one is governance. You spoke about the BRICS and their very successful summit in Kazan a few weeks ago. Should we be surprised of the success of the BRICS? Absolutely not. If I'm a country today that is in the developing world, of course I'm going to seek some form of a protection in the BRICS forum. When I see so many wars that were mentioned, so many violations of humanitarian laws, of international law, that are not effectively sanctioned. And of course, I'm going to try and speak up at the BRICS meeting, because I feel that perhaps in the UN my voice is not heard. And that's why we need a reform of the Security Council of the UN. And as you know, France is defending one formula, which is to add 4 seats for Brazil, India, Germany, and Japan, plus 2 additional permanent seats for African countries. If we get those 6 additional countries to the Council, and I know it's a very difficult reform to achieve, but we need to achieve it, so that when the Security Council speaks, then the entire world is speaking, and therefore the entire world is listening. And this reform of governance is key if we want those institutions that were built 8 years ago to help us overcome those challenges that were mentioned and discussed throughout the day. The third point where we're going to put a lot of weight is enforcement. Enforcement, what do I mean by that? Well, President of Slovenia just said there are so many breaches to international humanitarian law, and it's as if nothing was happening. This is not acceptable. If there is no enforcement, there is no law. The International Committee of the Red Cross offered to initiate a work stream to reflect on the violation of international humanitarian law. France is one of the countries that is starting to work alongside other countries from a bit from everywhere else in the world, with a target to be ready in 2026 to come up with a stream of proposals to the international community for the enforcement to be tightened. And if we make progress on solidarity, on governance, and on enforcement, then I'm confident that those institutions that we built, based on the idea that justice was the key to solve many of the challenges, then I'm sure that we can solve them together.
Many thanks, Minister, and especially for your perfect sense of timing. Of course, such a discussion cannot be formally concluded. But let me share with you in 1 or 2 minutes what I see as the differences in this conversation between the one we had today and the one we had in a quasi-similar format 2 years ago at the Paris Peace Forum. The first difference is that the situation has gotten worse. Second difference is that the climate issue was much higher in our discussion tonight than it was 2 years ago, and it's looming big in this North-South tensions. Third difference is that the notion of the necessity of a strategic global agenda for the South is much higher than it was 2 years ago. And the fourth one is that EU, the Europeans at large, including for this purpose the UK, Norway, Switzerland, and a few others, now, following the US elections, have a higher responsibility than before to stand for multilateralism, open trade, and North-South solidarity. So those are the 4 differences. I tried to set this as objectively as possible. There is 1 or 2 things which are common to what appeared at the time. The first one is that we need a reform of some of the multilateral institutions, starting with the UN Security Council, but also in the world of finance. And the second thing which has not changed is that, and that appeared already last time and it reappeared this time, no country should have to choose between reducing poverty and fighting for the environment. This would be my take at the end of this panel. And please join me in thanking our panelists for being here, for their very outspoken and clear contribution, and join me in thanking them with a round of applause.